Okay, good evening and welcome to Torah Studies, Parshas Eikev. And today, the topic of discussion, once you pop, you cannot stop. Yeah, the Pringles comes to mind. Yes, we're discussing today about how we can be inspired to be persistent, to be perseverant in our resolutions. We often take resolutions, want to do good things, and then we keep it for a while, and then we let go. It's not that it's not important. If it wouldn't be important, we wouldn't start it to begin with. But for whatever reason, sometimes it gets difficult. And the question is here: what is the message? How can we take this? How can we take real inspiration to be able to continue? And the Rebbe takes a lesson from this week's Torah portion and really applies it how it is important, and we can get very inspired from learning this to be persistent in our good things and our positive deeds and take it personally. So today's parsha continues the last speech that Moshe Rabbeinu gave before he passed away, and he reviews to the Jewish people the history, the experience after 40 years in the desert, and getting them ready to enter the Holy Land, encouraging them also about the mitzvahs, to keep the Torah commandments. So one of the verses is in this week's Torah portion. We're going to read it inside. So yep, there we go. Yes. Okay. Once you pop, you cannot stop. Giving up halfway is not an option. So what life perspective can help keep our progress up? So here comes the text that we are talking about in this week's Torah portion. Says Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people, Kol ha-mitzvah asher anochi metzavcha hayom tishmeru l'asais. Observe and fulfill all of the mitzvah that I command you on this day, so that you may live, multiply, and arrive in Israel, where you will possess the land that God swore to your forefathers. So you read this verse, what bothers you in this verse? Anything that doesn't make sense over here? Look at these words. Observe and fulfill all of the mitzvah. Kol ha-mitzvah. This is singular. Instead of mitzvot, kol ha-mitzvot, all the commandments, all the mitzvot. So this is a question that commentators talk about it. One of the commentators, Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, offers a very simple answer. So, in other words, the question is, why does it mention mitzvah in a singular rather than mitzvot, all the mitzvot? So, the Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi says, Sheshem mitzvah hu shem amin ki'ilu amar kol mitzvot. The word mitzvah connotes the category of mitzvah. It is like saying all the mitzvot. Okay? So, what is he saying? Sometimes you use this word mitzvah. You say kol mitzvah, all the mitzvah, the category of the mitzvah. Yeah, but why not use the word mitzvot? If you can, we always use the word mitzvot, so that's okay answer. But Here comes the Abarbanel, gives a little deeper explanation. Rabbi Don Yitzchok Abarbanel. He says as follows. It is well known among the wise that when something is complete, it is viewed as a single entity, despite its many components. He says, therefore, the word one and the word complete are used almost interchangeably. This applies to God's Torah as well. Mitzvot in the aggregate are one complete concept. He says, accordingly, our master Moses calls him Moshe Adonenu, our master Moses, sometimes refer to the commandments as mitzvot in the plural, for they are many, and sometimes in a singular, for they are as singular and unified as he who commanded them. So what is he saying? That basically, when you take the mitzvah, when you take the mitzvahs, you got to see the whole Torah as a one unit. And if you look at the whole Torah as one unit, you cannot pick and choose and say, okay, this mitzvah I do, this mitzvah I don't like so much, it's like too difficult. It's not to say that when you start, you shouldn't start one mitzvah at a time, of course, as long as you go in this way. But as a understanding the whole mitzvah, the whole Torah as one unit, this is what the Torah is telling you. Kol mitzvah, the whole mitzvah is one unit. And so we'll continue. Okay, so why use the expression all the mitzvahs? It makes sense if discussing mitzvahs as a subject. Mitzvahs all need to be accepted as one fully integrated unit. But still the question is, what is it that there must be something when he's saying kol a mitzvah? Yeah, you're explaining, it's nice explanations, but there must be, every word in the Torah is very precise. If you're talking about a certain mitzvah, is Moshe Rabbeinu talking about a certain mitzvah? Why not mention what mitzvah is it? Is he talking about all the mitzvahs? You can take them and explain them as a whole, all of the mitzvahs, and to say it specifically. Rashi comes here, Rashi really gives us an explanation on this verse, something totally out of the box. Here says Rashi, the famous commentator, he says the Medrash Agada, the Midrashic explanation, if you began a mitzvah, complete it. For a mitzvah is only attributed to the one who completes it. What is Rashi saying? Rashi tells us, when you take a mitzvah, kol ha-mitzvah, when he's saying, he's interpreting the word kol ha-mitzvah, not all of the mitzvahs. So he's not, that explains the answers. Why it's not, explains these two questions we had. Why is it not one talking about all of the mitzvahs? It's talking about a specific mitzvah. That Moshe is making a generic point, not about every mitzvah, but about any mitzvah. That any mitzvah, what you do, when he's saying kol ha-mitzvah, he's talking about any mitzvah. Any mitzvah that you do, when you start a mitzvah, do the whole of the mitzvah. Complete the mitzvah. That is the message, says the Rashi. In other words, don't stop in the middle of the way. The question is, why is it now that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them? because obviously one of the question that we had, one is that if we're talking about many mitzvahs, I don't think I mentioned this second question. Now, if we're talking about all of the mitzvahs, the question was, the Jewish people were standing there before they entered Eretz Israel. And before they entered the land of Israel, there was many, many mitzvahs that was not applicable to them. And here Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them all of the mitzvahs. So this is the two questions. If he's talking about a specific mitzvah, or is he talking about all of the mitzvahs? And here Rashi comes and gives us an answer that really answers all the question. He's not talking about a specific mitzvah, and he's not talking about all of the mitzvahs together. He's talking about any mitzvah. That any mitzvah that you do is Moshe telling us, Kol ha-mitzvah, do the whole mitzvah. Don't stop in the middle. Why is Moshe telling them right now, at that point of time? This is after 40 years of being in the desert. The Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them basically, realize, see the experience, what happened with the Jewish people, with your forefathers. They came out of Mitzrayim. They experienced this amazing miracles. They received the Torah. And they had it all going for them. But then they stopped in the middle. They had the golden calf. They had the sin with the spies. And Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them, look, you got to take the lesson. And when you do something, keep going with it. Don't stop in the middle. Rashi continues and says, he brings another example what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling them. Rashi brings an example, and he says that when you do a mitzvah, the one who completes the mitzvah gets the credit. Even if someone else started, but you complete it, when you take it and you finish the job, you get the credit. And he brings an example of the story with the bones of Yosef HaTzadik. You know, Yosef, when he was, before he passed away, he told the Jewish people to carry his bones out and bring him to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel. And indeed, they did it. Who did it? Moshe Rabbeinu did it. Moshe Rabbeinu did, and he carried the bones of Yosef, the Oren of Yosef with him. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was occupied. 40 years he was taking with him. So here comes what is interesting is that it says, who got the credit for carrying the bones of Yosef? Moshe didn't get the credit. Who got the credit? The Jewish people. Let's see it inside. So here Rashi answers the conundrum, saying, if you began a mitzvah, complete it, for a mitzvah is only attributed to the one who completes it. Last piece in the puzzle. The one who finishes the job gets the credit. But here we find another example of what we said. It says in the book of Joshua, where it is written, the remains of Joseph that the children of Israel had brought up from Egypt, they buried in Shechem. But didn't Moses transport Joseph's remains from Egypt? Yes. But because he did not complete the burial, and the Jews did, the entire project is attributed to them. So this is two critical understandings emerge from this teaching. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu carried it all along, but who got the credit? The one who finished it. It wasn't something due to any fault of Moshe. He could not go into Eretz Israel. to the land of Israel. God didn't let him go in, but he didn't finish the job. And the ones who finished, the Jewish people, they got the credit. And we have two critical understandings here. Number one, that if we begin a mitzvah, we are urged to complete it. It becomes a sacred obligation and becomes an expectation. You started something, finish it. And number two, if someone else completes it, the mitzvah is attributed to the second person, the person who finishes it. There is, however, another anecdote which seems to suggest the opposite, and that is with the story of King David and King Solomon. We know King David, he was planning to build the Beis HaMikdash, planning to build the temple, and he did all the preparations for it. And he wanted, and he bought the property in Jerusalem, the Mount Moriah. This is one of the places that the Torah says clearly, this is the place that when the the enemies, they claim it for themselves. This is one of the places that the Torah says clearly that King David bought it with his own money, paid full price for it. And he did all the preparations, but he did not end up building the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Hashem said, because King David, his hand was involved, was bloody. He had bloody hands. Why did he have bloody hands? Of course, self-defense. He protected the Jewish people, but it doesn't matter. No matter what the reason why he had to fight and kill people, but the fact that he had bloody hands, he could not build the holy temple in Jerusalem. Who built it? His son. His son finished the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and so based on what we just said, who should get the credit for building for the Beis HaMikdash? Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, because he was the one who completed, he was the one who built it and finished it. Yet, we find that the Beis HaMikdash is called on the name of King David. We say it every morning in the prayer, in the davening, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Abayis LaDavid. The psalm, a song to dedicate the house of David. So let's see it inside. Okay, so Moshe was preparing the Jews to enter the Holy Land with his final message, to continue to believe in God and not to quit halfway as the forefathers did. But here, regarding King David, it says the Psalms, a song dedicated to the house of David. Why is the temple attributed to David? Did David build it? No, Solomon built it. As the passage states, and Solomon built the house, Va'iven Shlomo et Habayit. So what is the answer? So here comes the Mechilta and says, rather, because David was deeply committed to building the temple, it is attributed to him. King David was very deeply devoted, as we said before. But the question is, what about Moses? Wasn't Moses so committed to bring up the bones of Yosef, while everybody else was busy by the Yam Suf, by the Red Sea, to take the spoils and all the jewelry and all the gold? And what was Moshe Rabbeinu busy with? Taking the Aron of Yosef, the coffin of Yosef. So what's the difference? Why here by Yosef, the bones of Yosef is who gets the credit? The Jewish people, not Moses. But the Beis HaMikdash, being that King David was so devoted for it, he got the credit? This is the question. David was attributed to the temple that Solomon completed, and yet the mitzvah is attributed to those who buried Yosef. How to reconcile this? So, to understand this, to give an answer to this question, we're going to discuss we're going into a halachic discussion regarding brokerage fee, the commission for brokers. Imagine if, let's say, someone comes over to you and wants to sell your house. Says, I have a buyer. He wants to buy the house, and you say, no, not interested. And then you get, one day you decide, you call up the person themselves, and you tell them, okay, would you like to buy my house? Do you have to pay brokerage fee? Well, of course, the answer would be, of course. He gave you the name, you should pay him the fee. But what if you said you're not interested, you don't like the person, whatever, he's an enemy of yours, and then another broker came and convinced you. He convinced you to sell the house to that person. Do you have to pay brokerage fee to the first broker as well? In that case, you may say, maybe not, because the second broker finished the deal. So the halacha is interesting halacha here. Okay, here's the question. Who is entitled to a commission? So here's a halacha from the Ramah that says, Reuven had a house to sell, and Shimon, an agent, proposed to sell it to Levi. Reuven replied that he doesn't get along with Levi and doesn't want to sell it to him. If Reuven then sold the house to Levi through a different agent, Reuven must pay Shimon a commission. In other words, even if you pay a commission to the second, it's not that you get a way of paying commission, but you still have to pay commission to the first one also. And the question is why? Why do you have to pay commission to the first one? The first one didn't finish the deal. So here is the Noida B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau. He says and explains that it's not really full commission to the first one. He gets only a partial commission, because after all, he started it up. He says, in my humble opinion, Rabbi Moshe Ishelish was referring to a percentage of commission. For certainly, the second agent also has a claim to the commission. Therefore, they're each entitled to a portion. And there's different discussion. And why does the first person get commission at all? That we need to understand. There's another scenario, and that is the shidduch. The best way of marrying your children is the shidduch. That's the proven way. You get in the way it's done through a shidduch. You marry the children young, and when you have a shidduch, the matchmaking, you have the two people, they know already, before they get together, they know the information that you need to know about the spouse. That so much of the shidduch, of the matchmaking, is you avoid the problems of going and dating for months and months and months until you figure out what the person by a shidduch, you know already 90% of what you want to know about the person, But in any case, How does shidduch work? So you get a shadchan. A shadchan is a matchmaker. And there's also rules and regulations of how much does what does a shadchan get? What happens if one person, sometimes a family, gets a phone call and says, I have what a boy I have for your daughter. With all the milas, and you say, you know what? No, not interested. Wasn't convincing enough. Then another shadchan calls up with the same offer. And the other shadchan was somehow more convincing, and you were convinced, and you got the shidduch done. Question is, which shadchan gets the money? So this is the interesting question. Okay. So when many people are involved in a match, halachically, who gets paid? The consensus is to share. Now, every community has different, they determine how, different customs, but it's not important, all the details. But in any case, our questions is the same. What about the principle of a person completing a mitzvah gets the credit? So both in the case of the brokerage and in the case of the matchmaking, if the bottom line is that the second broker finished the deal, why does the first person, if we follow, you can give me all kinds of logical explanations why the first person also has a part in it, but if we follow the rule that a mitzvah follows by goes by is named after the last one who finishes it, so why is this different? Okay, so here is an interesting explanation given from Rabbi Yaakov Papers, and he says as follows. It seems to me, as I ruled on many occasions, that if the initiator failed to secure the deal and other matchmakers secured it, he is entitled to a finder's fee only if the others did not conceive of the match on their own. In that case, because the initiator contributed to the idea, he is entitled to a fee in accordance with the local custom, though he failed to complete the deal. However, if the subsequent matchmakers thought of the match on their own and were unaware that the first matchmaker had thought of it previously, the first matchmaker did not contribute anything to the match. Had they not come along, his initiative would have been forgotten. Therefore, I see no reason for him to collect a fee. So not all initiators are alike. Some initiators initiate something and they contribute. In other words, they brought the idea to the table. But if the second matchmaker or the second broker comes up with the deal and had nothing to do, it came up on his own. It's not that he knew about the offer that the first person did, but if it's on his own, the halacha says that this doesn't, then the first one doesn't get the credit. In a way, we can explain this, that this is the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu, the story with Moshe, and the story of King David. But by the story of Moshe, the Jewish people would have done it regardless. Moshe Rabbeinu chose to do it. Not only Moshe Rabbeinu chose to do it, but the Jewish people wanted that Moshe should do it because he's of a greater, in a greater level. But the King David came up with the idea of building a full-fledged temple in Yerushalayim with all the details. It's not necessary that King Solomon would come up with the same idea. King David gave everything into it. So there is something here that King David contributed that King Solomon couldn't do it without King David. That is why there is a difference between King David and Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Talmud in Tractate Saita, if Moses had not transported him, would the Jews not have transported him? Does the verse not state, and the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, they buried in Shechem? And why did Moshe Rabbeinu do it? So they said, leave him. It is more honorable for him to be handled by an extraordinary person than by ordinary people. So this is the answer. The principle only applies if the second person starts from scratch. But if you accomplish a portion before the next person continues, you receive a bit of credit. Now, one thing we have to make sure, we have to clarify. Of course, when we say that when you start a mitzvah, you got to finish it, it doesn't mean that if you cannot finish it, don't start. Every little bit obviously counts. Whatever you do, it counts. Every mitzvah, it counts. But what we're saying here, what the Torah is teaching us, what Rashi is telling us, how Moshe Rabbeinu teaches the people, is that when you connect to a certain mitzvah, you connect with it completely, and when you connect to that mitzvah, it becomes yours. In other words, sometimes there are mitzvahs that are communal mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs that, everybody has to do it. Let's say you're talking about helping a neighbor, an elderly neighbor, going, talking to the person, helping her shopping or something. And let's say you started to do a mitzvah, and you started to do, and you did it for a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks. And then you say, you know what? Why should I do this? Maybe somebody else should also do it. The problem is here that if you started the mitzvah, it becomes your mitzvah. You become connected to the mitzvah. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he started with the mitzvah of carrying Yosef bones. He became connected with that mitzvah. So that is why, again, we're not going into the reasons Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't finish it. But the point here is, let's say you start a diet, you start eating healthy. So before you start a diet, it's a nice idea. It's a nice idea to have a diet. But once you begin the diet, once you start into it, then it becomes your sacred and personal obligation. You become connected. Now I should stop. I'm eating healthy already for a year. It's no longer an ideal, it's a nice thing to do to eat healthy. So once you start a mitzvah, you become connected to it. And when you connect to it, it becomes yours. Says the Rebbe, this is because once we begin the communal mitzvah, we develop a better feel and understanding for its subtle underpinnings. We should complete it so that it will be accomplished to the greater effect than if others step in the midway. Using the example of helping a neighbor, if you get involved personally with that person and the person becomes connected to you and counts on you, and all of a sudden you're going to say, oh, maybe somebody else should help. What is that person supposed to feel? Like she's neglected. And you don't care. You never really cared. Not always is it. Could be sometimes you have good reasons why things should change. But it has to be very, very carefully. You have to be very carefully examine the situation if this is something that you really should continue or should not continue. So self-love and the desire to choose an easier task can sometimes blind us into assuming that the Torah requires us to retire from our current obligations. If we examine and re-examine carefully and objectively, these assumptions might be proven wrong. Okay? So when embarking on a mitzvah, it's incumbent upon you to carry it across the finish line, especially when others would be without the insight you got along the way. So this is true in so many cases. People get excited about a certain mission. They want to do something. They want to do something positive, something good. And you start a project, you start a shear, you start something, and you get people involved. You start a program of helping people, get people involved, you get experience. And all of a sudden you're going to say, oh, maybe not, maybe somebody else would finish. Here, that's the thing. When you start something, you become connected to it, and this becomes your personal mission. And when you carry out this mission, then you are finishing the job and the whole thing is credited to you. And it's not that we are looking for credit, because ultimately we do the mitzvah regardless. Moshe Rabbeinu did the mitzvah even though he knew he's not going to finish it. They say Ronald Reagan, I think, said that. He said something to the line that we can accomplish, there's no limit to what we can accomplish if we're not going to look for the credit for what we do. If we're doing the things because it's right, then we're going to do endless things, not to get the credit. I had recently a person, there was a situation, somebody passed away, a very sad situation, and they needed someone to be with them in the last minute. And right away I called up a local shliach, was nearby, and then he showed up right away. And he came and he was there with the person the last minute in their life. Said the Shema Yisrael, said everything. And then a week later, the guy calls me up and he says he apologizes for not taking that same rabbi to do the funeral. They had their own rabbi. So he felt bad because he was there when we needed him, but then they took somebody else. I told him, what are you talking about? This is a mission, needed to be done, and it was done. The shaliach is not looking for credit, is not looking to, it didn't do it for ulterior motives. There was a mission to do it, and he did it. Now, this concept is also especially true today. The idea of fulfilling the mission completely. What mission are we talking about? The mission of all the generations. Jews throughout the generations are working on a mission to bring Mashiach. How is it done? to doing the Torah and mitzvahs through influencing more and more people to study the Torah, especially the teaching of Hasidus, as the Baal Shem Tov said. When he went up in heaven, he had his neshama went in the higher levels, and he met with Mashiach. And Mashiach told him, when is it coming? He asked Mashiach, when are you coming? And he told him, when your teachings will be spread outside. And this is happening today. So yes, our previous generations were on a much greater level than we are. Their mitzvah performance was much greater. Their Torah study was much greater. But you know what? We are the ones who bring everything to the finish line. We are the ones who carry through the entire mission. We are the last player in the game that can score the final point. We bring it to the finish line. So when we start something, the Yetzer Hara will come and say, leave it somebody else. There's more people that can get involved. Why do you have to do everything? This is the Yetzer Hara. We have to realize a mitzvah nikres al shem goimra. The mitzvah is credited to the one who finishes it. And we have the opportunity. Although we are much lower than the previous generations, we have this mission, the privilege and obligation to bring us that a mitzvah, to get us across the finish line. As the Rebbe says, although Jews in previous generations were more spiritual and more observant of Torah and mitzvahs than our generation, nevertheless, the mitzvah is attributed to the ones who complete it. The redemption will come in the merit of mitzvahs performed by Jews in this generation, who will complete and conclude the task on the eve of Mashiach. This should, indeed it does, encourage each of us to increase our observance of Torah and mitzvahs, thereby hastening our redemption by the righteous Redeemer. So with generations before counting on us, it is our sacred obligation to complete the job and bring Mashiach. And the good news is, we have the power. Hashem gives us the power, and we are not just one more link in the chain. We are the last link in the chain. We got to make sure that we don't fall asleep at the wheel. Yes, the Yetzer Hara will try to stop us, but we got to make sure to continue, especially now in the last days. Says the Rebbe, it is quite possible that after a lengthy period on the job, we can grow lax. We might figure that it is time to hand the reins to another, and we will offer aid and counsel, etc. In these moments, remember the Torah's instruction. If you began a mitzvah, complete it. Since you began the work of spreading the well springs of Torah and Hasidus, it is your obligation and privilege to continue and to complete the task. And when we resolve firmly and truly to continue the task of disseminating the Torah in general and Hasidus in particular, God will aid and empower us to overcome our difficulties. Together with all Jews, we will conclude the task and usher in our righteous Redeemer, Mashiach Tzidkenu, verily and speedily in our times. That's The most powerful message we can take from this parsha. We got to do the kol ha-mitzvah, the entire mitzvah, meaning that everything is up to us. We can do it, and we, Be'ezrat Hashem, will see the results, and we see the fruits, and we see the blessing when you commit to this mitzvah of continuing, take another mission, another project, and you go through, you carry it through. Hashem gives us the bracha in everything. Begashmias, beruchnias. Let us hope it happens very soon. Amen.